Yep.
So welcome to Wednesday morning. I always forget to formally talk to people who, on average, there are between 6 and 9 people who,
No kidding.
who usually they don't join in live, but they come later in the week. Thursday's a big day. And so I want to say hello to those of you who continue to listen in, and I don't know, maybe we're your morning coffee or something like that, which is fine. Glad to have you listen in and be a part of this. Today, we are, of course, in Jeremiah, and I
13.
think 13, that's right. Yeah. So I guess I'll do it, we'll read 13, and then I want to read just a short summary of Jeremiah from Walter Brueggemann's book, From Judgment to Hope, which is a study of the prophets. And I just thought we should hear him as he puts Jeremiah into some boxes.
Some context.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, so who's going to read today? Jeremiah chapter 13 is where we are.
I kind of made you read
Yes,
last
you
time.
did. So shall I make you read this time?
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
Okay. Thus said the Lord to me, go and buy yourself a linen loincloth and put it on your loins, but do not dip it in water. So I bought a loincloth according to the word of the Lord and put it on my loins. And the word of the Lord came to me a second time, saying, take the loincloth that you bought and are wearing, and go now to the Euphrates, and hide it there in a cleft of the rock. So I went and I hid it by the Euphrates, as the Lord commanded me. And after many days the Lord said to me, go now to the Euphrates, and take from there the loincloth that I commanded you to hide there. Then I went to the Euphrates and dug, and I took the loincloth from the place where I had hidden it. But now the loincloth was ruined. It was good for nothing. Then the word of the Lord came to me. Thus says the Lord, just so I will ruin the pride of Judah and the great pride of Jerusalem. This evil people who refuse to hear my words, who stubbornly follow their own will and have gone after other gods to serve them and worship them, shall be like this loincloth, which is good for nothing. For as the loincloth clings to one's loins, so I made the whole house of Israel and the whole house of Judah cling to me, says the Lord, in order that they might be for me a people, a name, a praise, and a glory. But they would not listen. You shall speak to them this word. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, every wine jar should be filled with wine. And they will say to you, do you think we do not know that every wine jar should be filled with wine? Then you shall say to them, thus says the Lord, I am about to fill all the inhabitants of this land, the kings who sit on David's throne, the priests, the prophets, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem with drunkenness. And I will dash them one against the other, parents and children together, says the Lord, and I will not pity or spare or have compassion when I destroy them. Hear and give ear, do not be haughty, for the Lord has spoken. Give glory to the Lord your God before he brings darkness and before your feet stumble on the mountains at twilight. While you look for light, he turns it into gloom and makes it deep darkness. But if you will not listen, my soul will weep in secret for your pride. My eyes will weep bitterly and run down with tears, because the Lord's flock has been taken captive. Say to the king and the queen mother, take a lowly seat, for your beautiful crown has come down from your head. The towns of the Negeb are shut up with no one to open them. All Judah is taken into exile, wholly taken into exile. Lift up your eyes and see those who come from the north. Where is the flock that was given to you, your beautiful flock? What will you say when they set as head over you those whom you have trained to be your allies? Will not pangs seize you like those of a woman in labor? And if you say in your heart, Why have these things come upon me? It is for the greatness of your iniquity that your skirts are lifted up and you are violated. Can Cushites change their skin, or leopards their spots? Then also you can do good, who are accustomed to do evil. I will scatter you like chaff, driven by the wind from the desert. This is your lot, the portion I have measured out for you, says the Lord. Because you have forgotten me and trusted in lies, I will lift up your skirts over your face, and your shame will be seen. I have seen your abominations, your adulteries and neighings, your shameless prostitutions on the hills of the countryside. Woe to you, O Jerusalem! How long will it be before you are made clean?
Well, now that's graphic.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me how they use those very sexual
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I mean,
allusions, you know.
yeah.
It's like,
I mean, the footnote says that the whole thing of the loincloth is, I guess, for a man, you have this cloth, and normally you would wet it and it would cling to your skin.
Oh, yeah.
And it's an image of the complete intimacy between God and Israel.
Oh, interesting.
That's,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a simile
I get
of
that allusion.
right, there is this, it's like a skin. That's how God imagines that Israel will be attached to God. But instead, it's like Jeremiah takes the underwear off and buries it along the river, and it's dirty, and it has no use whatsoever. And he goes to get it under instruction from God, and it's useless. It's useless.
so the relationship has been
The
destroyed?
relationship has been destroyed. Not only is there not intimacy, but that the loincloth itself is destroyed.
Good for nothing.
Nothing coming back from that. Can't wash it, can't.
No, can't.
Right.
And then
Done.
it goes on. Oh my goodness, it's like,
Yeah.
I will see you raped. It's like,
Yeah. Where's my defender, huh?
now, maybe I don't have to read it. I'm just going to tell you because I was struggling over this. What is it that Jeremiah is so really, really unhappy about? And what is it that the people have done that he just believes was absolutely against the will of God? And I found it really interesting that Jeremiah doesn't think there should have ever been a dynasty.
Oh,
He doesn't think there should have ever been a King David.
no kings.
He doesn't have any of that. He thinks that the people, very much like when the people cried out for a king and they got Saul, at the time Samuel said, don't do this. Don't do this. This is not how God imagined the relationship would be. And if you establish a king, the king will create the structure of government that will be a replacement for me, and that replacement for me will ultimately become the reason you reject me. So Samuel says, well, God relented. Jeremiah doesn't believe that God relented.
Oh.
And he thinks that the entire thing,
Well, Samuel didn't relent,
no,
so
yeah,
he was the
that's
representative, right?
That's right. Yeah, and then the whole mess of, oh, yeah, that's right, I anointed Saul, and oops, I made a mistake because Saul wouldn't go to fight. And so then now, where do the original foundational fractures begin in the people? They begin right there.
Wow.
And they begin there.
Way back here.
Yeah.
You can't trust kings not to make alliances with other kings. Kings are mainly kind of preoccupied with their own kingdom and their own
Power
and
and
they don't want to do anything to jeopardize that. So then you get people going towards other nations then they'll follow what other nations do. I think this is Jeremiah's complaint. You have let that in, that otherness that will lead to your downfall. And look, they're coming from the north. The ones that you made alliances with, they are coming to get you.
Yeah, and so even as you're just talking, what's filling my mind is this idea that for Jeremiah, his idea, his hope for the people of God was more of a nomadic tribe. You know, that they would somehow, that they would somehow move like the original 13 settlements would on the other side of the river. When they got there, the land was given to them. They had to do some fighting in some of the stories, but these were a peaceful people. They had arrived to farm, to use the bounty of the promised land, to live off of the land, and to be generous and careful in their relationships with their neighbors. Their scales in the marketplace were supposed to be fair.
Instead of...
Yeah, that's right. And their declarations about the value of their money when the money changers came in, it was to be fair. It was supposed to be what it was supposed to be, and they were to be a blessing.
They were to treat all people that
All people, all the families of the
not
earth.
just the folks in your neighborhood, but walk softly on the earth. Is that not what a lot of indigenous cultures kind of
Right,
profess?
and to be a presence in the earth, a surprising presence of grace and fairness. But the struggle from the very beginning was, can a group of people like that survive in this world? And the children of Israel said, we can't survive this way. We have to have a military. We have to have accumulation of wealth to take care of ourselves. What about the future? What if there's a famine? You know, and they began to think in these kinds of ways. And I really believe that is the sum total of what all these prophets talk about as they pursued other gods. They pursued other gods. They went elsewhere for their sense of security.
Sure.
And you know, we need to be careful.
Don't we humans need to be
Yes,
careful?
sitting here in a well-defended military nation that seeks to make sure that we preemptively wipe out any threat to our way of life at all, and the accumulation of massive wealth.
Yeah.
How can we even now, how can we hear this and then still call ourselves a people of God? How can we do that?
Yeah, it's like that. The distribution of wealth is way out of whack, even among individuals in this country, but as the country as a whole compared to the rest of the world. And we seem to think that, you know, it's ours.
We deserve it.
We did. We worked. There's a million excuses. We worship the right way. We deserve it. Our form of government is better. We are exceptional. You hear all those excuses. But I think
Hard work is
Jeremiah is saying,
rewarded.
yeah,
That's right.
Jeremiah
on
is
you go.
saying,
Work
look,
hard and you'll do
You'll
well.
do it.
Look at this. Look
Yeah.
at how it comes back to the people who are, you know, working hard for it.
Jeremiah is looking and saying, God isn't making those excuses. God's saying, look, there's something really wrong here. You've got more than you need. Those people have not enough. Fix it, folks. And we're not doing a good job of fixing it. No one ever has. I mean, that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it's
Thank
still
God better,
just as
hasn't it?
bad or worse now. And yeah.
No,
And it's so hard to give up stuff and money and wealth and power and, you know, you feel like you're,
security, yep, all
Yeah.
that. Mhm.
yeah.
I don't mind like the recognition that, you know, we have gone this way, we have accumulated these things and we live this way. The part that bothers me most is how we reconstruct the history, how we retell it. And we, you know, we make up stories about how we got here, you know, and like, and then give ourselves credit as if we are the treasure of God when,
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
collective amnesia, you know, we don't want to know. That's why they're trying to take all of that stuff out of the history books that the kids read. You know, you're not getting a clear picture. good and bad of what we've done, you know. So, I mean, are we going to have a whole generation growing up thinking that the United States has never done any wrong? And, you know, that's, good luck to them if that's their goal, because there are so many things that point otherwise. And there are too many people who do have, direct memories of these things. But
Well, even,
I don't know. Even Jeremiah.
But those memories can be extinguished. They really can be extinguished if you don't tell the story that way, and you offer the alternative story, which is, why is the United States in the position it's in? Because God blessed it.
Oh, yeah.
Because we've arrived here because of God's blessing. It goes to the story of the house in the middle of the burned neighborhood.
Right.
It's like, why is that house standing? And we jump in with a theology that says, those people must have done something right. And it's worse because I just got flashback back to my missiology class in seminary with Orlando Costas, who was a Costa Rican theologian. Fabulous, fabulous mind. And he would talk about how history is taught. We fight for the correct story of American slavery for the African Americans. His thing was, you're only touching the surface. You need to go to Costa Rica and go to a history class in high school in Costa Rica, where you will learn that the aggression of Europeans when they arrived in Central America and their ravenous mission to steal all the gold and to take the gold of the Aztecs and then to take it off to European nations and say, oh, this is now the basis of our value of our dollar, and this and we
And make a couple of gold crosses so you can say it's for the glory of God.
Yeah, and for
As we
him,
steal.
you could see his heart ached for teaching in a seminary in the United States where students, we're good intended.
Yeah.
And he would look at us and he would say,
Yeah.
you have no idea. You have no idea of how the history has been rewritten to justify where you are and for what you have done. And by you, he didn't mean us individually, but he meant
as a people.
As a
yeah, as a
society.
people.
Yeah.
And then, like Jeremiah, he was prophetic. And he would say, the crust of that justification's got to be broken. It has to be cut through. You need the real history. You need more of the actual how did you get here. And instead of seeing ourselves as, the new Jerusalem and the new favored ones, that instead we recognize, we got what we got because we took what we took.
Right.
And then painted it into the picture of God's favor. I just...
That's like Turkey trying to erase the entire memory of the people over the Armenian genocide during the First World War. And you're not allowed to mention that in Turkey, or you're going to be put in jail.
Oh, wow.
It's not in the history books, but the Armenian people remember it. So there's always somebody who's going to say, even that's not a correct retelling of history. Acknowledge it and move on. Some areas of the world have tried to make amends for past problems. Like here, we've tried to, talk about the schools that we set up for indigenous people. And it's just recently with Deb Haaland being the Secretary of the Interior that was,
a real acknowledgement that
that
had really happened and still,
Yeah, it was horrendous.
yeah, it was horrendous.
Canada has tried to do that.
Yeah.
Australia, at least there's some movement towards, we are acknowledging that we made mistakes and we're trying to apologize and we're trying to make amends in some small ways at least, but some ways, instead of this movement that says, we're not going to ever talk about that again. That is not part of who we are. So which side, it looks now like when Deb Holland leaves,
Yeah,
Oh,
we'll go back.
who
to-
are they getting
Yeah.
to come in, and what more damage can be done when you think you're just starting to make some headway? I guess it's the
Otherwise-
ebb and flow of what, yeah.
And so, what does Jeremiah want from the people who are there? The people, I'm not talking about the leaders. Jeremiah, he already sees this entire project of God walking with a group of nomadic people, and God would be their God, and they would be God's people, that they would inhabit the earth, and maybe in the world we live in, they would suffer. You know, they would suffer. But you have prophets that come along and say, that's okay. That's the way it's going to have to be the people of God. You're going to have to suffer.
Didn't Jesus suffer?
Yes, it exactly fits into the theology of the suffering of Jesus on the cross. So,
Well, even his life.
in his life. And what did he do? Did he form an army? Did he, that song, he could have called 10,000 angels to, set him down? No, he didn't. And the question then is, do we, as people of faith, of any tradition, can we trust in God? And in that trust of God, I mean, I feel sometimes like real pacifists have this as their life commitment. It doesn't matter if we're invaded and our properties are taken away, we will not resort to violence. We will trust that somehow God will work that all out. And I don't have that in
It's
me.
not up to us.
Yeah, it's not up to us.
But guess what?
I know.
Kind of is.
I know.
And then sometimes we don't live to see that justice, which we talked about last night. But that's the way life is.
And that is at the root of this life of faith that comes out of the Abrahamic tradition, which is, if a neighboring country invades and puts us to torture and does all of that and takes everything we have, maybe we'll even die. I mean, the Apostle Paul, he has a rhetoric like this. He says we get knocked down, we get pushed out, and sometimes even in the experience of life, we are dead. But our faith says we shall rise again. So the resurrection becomes the promise to those who don't survive in this world, who don't. And Paul says, you've got to hold on to that as your vindication. Not that God's going to come along and build you a big mansion
In this
life. This life is not our home.
Don't the African American Gospels
They
encapsulate that?
Absolutely, they encapsulate, because what choice did they have? They saw themselves as people who had been exposed to this gospel. They heard a thread in the gospel that white Americans and Christians could not hear. We could not hear what they were hearing. And now you listen to the spirituals and the songs that come out of that, and now we go, wow, that's really powerful. Because many Christians now feel like they're becoming powerless in the society as well. We've been marginalized. This is no longer, you hear it all the time, this is no longer a Christian society.
But then there's the Christian nationalism movement.
Yeah, they
It's
want it back.
oh,
They want it back.
but not that way.
I wouldn't say that's Christian movement, though. That is far from Christianity.
You're right.
It's a
I think
movement
that's
they
a
put
political-
Christian on,
Exactly.
a little bit like the Crusades.
Yeah, I mean, some of these things you just you can't ignore it. It's going to hit you over the head. But in Islam too, this is the idea: is this life is not the reality. It's what's to come. And how do you comport yourself while you're here? How do you face trials and tribulations, or how do you face good stuff? What do you do with it? It's hard to operate with that in your mind all the time, because we're human beings.
We're flesh and blood, aren't we?
Exactly. We want good stuff. We want to succeed. We want, we know about the life to come, but we have our fingers crossed most of the time, like, I believe that, I think, and it's hard. It makes it harder. It makes it more tempting to say, just this time I'll compromise my faith because I want this job, or I want, that house, or this car, or I want that recognition, and maybe I'll kind of not say what I really feel. It's like we make all kinds of excuses and compromises. We're human.
Very much so.
But there's, I don't know, as you're talking, I'm trying to put into words how I'm feeling about this, because again, these days I had this conversation going on with God all the time about how valuable was my past. I look back into the growing up as a fundamentalist, but a different fundamentalist because we were in the charismatic movement and all the rest of that. And I feel like what I'm aware of is Christianity, not just for the charismatics, but even for the Presbyterians and the Methodists and all the rest of that. The practice of Christian faith was a private thing, even among us. We were in the world, but we were not running political campaigns. Mm-hmm. We said, the political world is beyond the reach of us. Our work is the creation of the beloved community within the church, so you can leave the world behind, come into the community of the church, and here we will help each other to survive. There was really strong emphasis on the fact that our hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' love and righteousness. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a hope for the world. It wasn't. The world is a bad place. Mm-hmm. It's and Laura picked a song for this coming Sunday, and she's like, I don't know, does this work? Is this right? And it's a famous African-American woman singing a beautiful song, Come Jesus Now.
Oh, yeah.
Come now. And she said, is that us? Mm-hmm. Is that our? And I said, well, for goodness sakes, yes. Mm-hmm. It's always been supposed to be our hope that Jesus would in fact return, and that he would come, and that he would finish the work that was started. But along the way, there was a big period of time for American Christianity where the hope, even in the African American community, it's like had the angel come down and take me off the earth, lift me off the earth, get me out of here, God, because this is broken.
Well, yeah, I guess you would get to that point.
Yeah.
But even as a Christian and now as a Muslim, I'm understanding that also you are in the world right now.
Yes.
And you are actually compelled by your faith to try and fix some of the things that you see are wrong. And if you can't fix them with your hands by action, I mean, if it's going to cause you to do some awful violence, then okay, you leave that. But then you try to fix it with your words. And if you can't fix it that way, you fix it by prayer and in your heart. You got to do something, though. You're not supposed to just sit back and let people be taken advantage of. Yeah. When you see the wrong around you. You're still a part of this world, whether you like it or not. Here you are. What
Right.
are you going to do about it?
And I agree entirely with where we are today, that is where we are. But here's my look back. When I was a young Christian, teenager, I have never checked this. I don't think you could find a church that had a food pantry.
Really?
They didn't do it.
Not even in the inner cities?
No, they didn't do
Because the
it.
Catholic
They were
churches
not
have always
involved.
had-
They were not involved, especially not in comparison to the way it is now.
Right.
You can't find a Protestant church that doesn't have some kind of
Right.
ministry
Or like a nursery school.
or nursery
food
school or something.
pantry or-
But we came out of a period of time where when you walked through those doors, you entered into a community that was, yes, loving and caring and cared for the people who were part of it, but that the outside world was beyond the pale of what they were called to do, unless,
I think the
You were.
Catholic Charities have been working here ever since Bing Crosby was singing to, you
Oh,
know.
Yeah.
long
I mean,
before
was-
that.
Yeah, you know, what's her name, Day and all the missions.
Yeah,
In the
I
inner
agree with you.
cities, I think that was
Yeah,
a
Sisters
mission
of Charity,
of
it's
the
been going
Catholic-
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
I don't know about the Protestant churches. I don't
Well, the
have any-
Salvation Army was sort of the
That's
Protestant
true.
church's branch of it, but
Yeah.
that was a separate organization. And
Yeah.
so, and you're right, to call in, okay, in my telling, my little person telling of the history, is the Catholics, and especially the Catholic priests and the monasteries, and they very much had a sense of our mission isn't just for the building of the community, but for caring for people. And so my experience was nothing to do with the Catholics. It
Well,
was
mine
100%
either.
Protestant.
Yeah, right.
100%. And, you know, so when I was in college, Grove City College, Christian college, there was an awakening among the students, the organization called the Evangelicals for Social Action.
Oh.
They were hated. They were hated by the predominant Presbyterian churches. Evangelicals are not for social action. You're not supposed to get involved. No, that is.
It's only about
Yeah.
converting people.
It's about converting people, or don't go too far in that conversion thing or you start to look radical. But just, it's about nurturing the faith that you received from your mothers and fathers. You come to church, you do your church thing, and then you go out to live your life, which is beyond the pale of what ultimately was happening in the church. Now, I would say I celebrate where we are. You know, you look at churches' profiles of themselves, they brag about their mission and their,
Right.
it's, I have lived through this time where, you know, the mission committee of the church was, you know, a group of people who cared for people beyond the pale of the church, the mission committee. So there was all of these committees, trustees and property and everything else. And then one of the things was the mission committee. But believe it or not, they're trying hard. They're not as successful as they want to be about it, but trying to grab a hold of that language and to ask not what does the mission committee do, but what is the mission of your church? What is its mission? Can you say why you exist and what you exist for? What is God calling you to? That way of thinking was completely alien to the whole structure, at least my experience of the Protestant church.
As being a young child in the Presbyterian church, I don't know what I'm going to out my parents here.
Okay.
Which, sorry, I don't know what they did with their offering, but the Sunday school kids had the little offering envelopes too, and it was divided in
Split.
half. One side was for us,
Yep.
and the other was for others. And my mom never put money in the others.
Oh, no.
Never. And I remember asking, well, why, you know? And she said, because we need so much right here that I don't see why we should put money in
Oh,
that.
boy, how
I don't
many
know
times
what.
have we heard that lately, huh?
And I'm sorry,
That,
but I'm
yes.
hoping that that wasn't the attitude with the adult, you know, offering. But it was kind of the idea that we have so much that we need to do right here. So why are we even diverting funds for
What, you
something
need
else?
new brass candlesticks?
Oh, there was
or
always, the roof leaks.
Roof leaking,
Or it was usually physical stuff. Yeah.
And I just have to say to you, from my experience, your hope that it was only the Sunday school. Because
Unlikely.
the reason that double envelope came into existence was because there was a significant push from the general population of the people involved in the church to stop giving money away, to stop it, to just completely stop it. Our call is to nurture our own community, to build up our own community, and the fights that took place over it had to be resolved by giving people, okay, all right, you don't want any of your pledge to go outside to the mission of the world. You don't want any of your pledge to do that. Okay, so we'll have a double offering, and you can then give to what you want to give to.
Don't you wish we could do that with our taxes?
Yes, I know.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of stuff I wouldn't want to give.
And then in my life, I was
Several.
I was called to shepherd churches in the period of time where the consequences of that were huge.
Sure.
And so what I have shepherded for churches to getting rid of the divided envelope. And to go back to now the new language emerged, right? We have a unified budget. And the unified budget is our commitment. You, as members of the church, don't get to designate, I want to give $500 to pay the heat. Do we have a community or not? Do we? And the place where we show we have a community is in the unified budget. And you let the elders
Decide.
designate and put it out. Now,
When I became an elder in that same church,
yes,
though, then I saw, well, we do have, the place needs to be painted, there's shingles fall, there was a lot of
legitimate
need.
needs for that.
But there was also always money that went to presbytery, and we understood that
We hoped.
some of that was for missions outside the presbytery, and then, even our church on its own was a big contributor to some of the, I hate to say it now, the schools that the Presbyterian Church ran for the indigenous people. I don't know what they were like, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. For some reason, my Presbyterian church in Palisades Park was a big supporter of that, and it seemed good to me. I don't know whether the schools, even now, I don't know whether the schools were
Right,
punitive.
were they those
or were they
kinds of
actually
schools? Right.
reforming? But there was, so I did see when I got older that it went beyond that. But my mom's point of view was like, I'm not putting it in that other side of the envelope when there's so much we need to do here. And I think Americans as a whole kind of feel that way about the rest of the world sometimes.
Oh, definitely. You see it on
Definitely.
Facebook all the time.
Yeah, definitely. It's a
Not even giving to the church.
yeah,
Well,
Oh, yeah,
that's right.
that's right.
I can't give to anyone else because I need it myself.
Family first, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and there's, in all these tracks of experiences that I would say, okay, well, I could write a book about that. Because in that time period where a lot of congregations were not directly engaging in support of individual missions, they were not.
No.
They would give their money to the presbytery. And the presbytery, I'm a pastor during this time period. Presbytery had a powerful mission committee. And people pledged their money to the presbytery until people began to dig into it. And they realized that when you give your money to the presbytery, there's an administrative scam that happens. And the presbytery began, in the New Brunswick Presbytery, was terrible. The New Brunswick Presbytery merged into a unified budget because they wanted to take the money that was coming into missions and they wanted to pay the staff of the presbytery. And it bent my brain. And I would say, wait a minute.
And then there's that giant endowment fund that we
Yes.
can never touch, no
No.
matter what chaos is going on around,
Yeah, and so what began then and now is really, it's terrible. You can read about it if you read the news in the PCUSA, is that giving to mission through the Presbyterian Church has dried up almost entirely. The only money that they have is money that's coming off of dedicated endowments that were given where the profits, the proceeds were to be used. But people's giving through the presbytery or through the synod or through the General Assembly is in huge disrespect. People don't believe it. And then and I've said this a long time ago, ultimately the thing that ended our denomination's real power was the arrival of the internet. Because once the internet arrived, we don't need middle judicatories at all. They were supposed to be for communication and for opportunities to bridge the gap.
I never understood synod.
Yeah,
frankly. I was like, what do they do, actually?
well, and that was when there weren't cars, when there were regional offices, so you
guess.
didn't have to drive all the way to Louisville. You could go
Yeah.
to the regional office and there would be people there. All of that is a skeleton of bygone days. Now, if a congregation or missions committee wants to find out about a workers' initiative in Florida called the Immokalee Workers, we don't need a Presbyterian mission worker to talk to us about it. We can go on the internet, we can engage in real-time conversation with people, and we can make a decision about our own giving. And when we give to them, there aren't 4 hands out
In between.
paying for the middle administrations.
True.
I mean,
Yeah.
now, that would be great if then the giving stayed at the same level, but to Barbara's point, what happens is people just decide, you know what, I don't really want to give money to the church. I don't. I'll give it somewhere else. I'm always reminded immediately of the time the Boundbrook Church decided they were going to stir stewardship in the church, and so they were going to do a door-to-door campaign. They were going to visit every group of people that were members, and they were going to go to their house, knock on the door, and sit down like Jehovah's Witness and have a conversation with them about their giving. And at one point, one of the elders said to me, and I thought it was a mistake from the very beginning, well, you should be on one of those teams. And I was like, well, okay, it's awkward as hell, but yeah, I'll go. So we went in, we visited this young couple, they had just had a baby.
Aw.
Yeah, and we went in and sat down, and the husband was very outspoken. He worked on Wall Street, and he came into the living room and he said, "What's this?" And so I said, "Well, Matt, we want to talk to you about your level of giving to the church." He said, "You might as well just leave right now, because I'm not going to give any money to the church until I am established. Once I'm established, and once I have money saved for my kids' college, and I was like, how big is your list?
You're right.
How big is your list? I don't think you'll ever get there."
No, you won't.
And he said, well, if I don't get there, then that means God hasn't given me enough yet to start giving to the church.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, it was a conversation that stuck in my head.
Yeah.
I can still hear it now. I just wanted to get out of the room.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of that happens. And when I was an elder here way back, we did those kinds of things, and I hated to do that.
Yes.
And so I was given a list of people to contact, but the out was, please, when you talk to them, you can also tell them if they want to decline a visit. Well,
Yeah.
just about everybody's going to do it. It's because it's a very uncomfortable visit. But that's the way it was. And so your list went from like that to, okay, I'll speak to a couple of people.
My
and
friends.
And it ends up being somebody you're really close to, and yeah. I don't understand. I mean, I was uncomfortable with that. But mainly because I didn't have a lot of money. So I'm going and asking for people. I understood why people didn't have any money. Could you give something? I mean, I can't do that. But if you can't do that, how does the church survive? It's like, I should be able to do that. If I'm willing to be an elder, I always had real guilt feelings about that. I don't know.
Well, I think that we should be, if we're going to do something like that, we should be on a much more regular basis, making visits and having,
Right.
relationships
Yeah,
built.
we're not only
Right,
talking.
go out and
you're
get to
not-
know people, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have
Yeah.
to do that if
Yeah.
you're going to then talk about
To be fair,
stewardship.
we used to do
You
that
have to give
occasionally
them-
too. Yeah, we used to do that occasionally.
Occasionally, but
Right.
it's not like
But
a,
it seems like the big push to do that was always
Around
we need
money.
something. Yeah. Jeez. Well, I don't know. Barbara should remember. I mean, we did do membership visits too. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
Well, we in several of the churches, again, the Boundbrook Church, it's a big church, big number, like 950 members.
No,
And
that's a lot.
so we would get slammed whenever we tried this door-to-door thing, and people would say, the only time you guys ever contact
Yeah.
me is when you want
Want
money.
something. Yeah.
So we listened to that, and so what we did was, long before stewardship season, we would divide up the congregation to make check-in calls. And so the elders, there were 24 of them, would take a group and they would make a phone call. Back when the phones were still in use, you know. And they would call and they would say, hi, this is, Frank from church. And I'm just checking to see, how are you doing? Is everything okay? Are you guys doing okay? And they wrote a report. They would write, well, I called Frank and, and like this was the report. And because we did that 3 times before the stewardship call, whenever anybody said, hey, the only time you ever call on me is when you want money, we go, oh, no, that's not true. But it didn't change
That
anything.
felt felt that way to them, even though.
It didn't change anything. It didn't.
No. There has to be some
it's
kind
like-
of more involvement, I think, in order to.
Yeah, and then you read the journal articles about the inner mind of the pastors, and pastors will write how resentful they are when congregation members say, you don't come to visit me, you don't do this and do that for me, and then they stand behind the pulpit on Sunday morning where people don't come to church. And what am I supposed to do about those feelings of resentment? But in the scope of this getting off the track, which is what Jeremiah is so upset about, is that the entire train has moved off of God's intention for a people on the planet who live by faith. And Brueggemann says that he was so upset about the idea of the institution of the king that what he wanted, it's sort of like we talk about how this country is guided by the Constitution. And he says that Jeremiah believed that where king and temple were the ordering institutions for Isaiah wanted to correct the kingdom. The ordering institution of Jeremiah was simply the Torah and Sinai, and that is the 10 Commandments and the extensive imagination interpretation of them in the 4 books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In other words,
The books of Moses.
the books of Moses. The guide for our lives is to be these words that were given by God for the establishment. The focus of the Torah, I love this, the focus of the Torah in Deuteronomy especially is on social justice for the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the immigrant, and those without social protection in a patriarchal society.
Yep.
Jeremiah tradition insists that the Jerusalem establishment was a wholesale way of violating the Torah's requirements. I have never heard that before. It was Jerusalem, the building and the focus of Jerusalem was breaking the covenant. And it leads to covenantal sanctions that would bring destruction of Jerusalem. And then he quotes from Jeremiah 11, they did not obey or incline their ear, but everyone walked in the stubbornness of an evil way. So I brought upon them all the words of this covenant which I commanded them to do, but they did not do. I've never heard, and I've said this to you before, in the Christian tradition I grew up in, the Davidic kingdom is still celebrated as, an early experience of Jesus, because Jesus was, the descendant of David and the establishment of all of that. I never really realized that there's Jeremiah sitting right here and going, David who? David who? You mean the warrior who built a warrior city called Jerusalem and then said it was named after peace? Wow.
It is ironic that it's called Jerusalem because it hasn't seen much peace in all these years. Yeah.
And maybe that's why,
Well, again, according to Jeremiah, it's fun to me to have these random thoughts that go through my mind, and then something inside me goes, shh, don't say that. Don't say that. Don't think that. Don't think that. But then Jeremiah comes along and says, wow, how far off course could you get? You elect Saul a king who wasn't a warrior. He was not a warrior. He was a man of prayer. And as soon as everybody discovered that,
I didn't want him.
you pursued him and killed him. And instead installed, the ruddy young shepherd boy who appeared to have God's favor and became the warrior king.
Well, if we had Grammy Awards back then, he would have gotten those too, because he was a musician as well, right?
Oh,
Right,
he's
and
had
a poet.
he had a lot of
Everything.
He
talent.
did it all.
He had a lot of talent.
He was
A
loved by the
Renaissance
people.
man before the Renaissance. Well,
I mean, I think, I always have trouble with painting someone with one brush, I think that there's an awful lot that David did, said, wrote, that is helpful,
Right.
And so, but being king might have been the biggest problem, sounds like.
in Islam, the prophets are always looked upon favorably.
Yeah.
The foibles that David is shown to have had in the Bible is just not there in Islam.
Oh,
So it's easier to love David or Daoud in our faith than to see David.
with all the blemishes.
Yeah, actually, I think, don't want to be blasphemous, but the David in the Bible is probably closer to, what's the reality of being a king? You're ending up having a lot of temptations. And very few people live up to that maxim, to those whom God has given a lot is expected. That's pretty hard to do. When you've got everything, it's hard to look like past your own nose sometimes, Really.
Well, yeah, if you want to see past the nose of David, read Walter Brueggemann. Because Walter Brueggemann says that it's in the record to show that David, Bathsheba, and that whole was a minor problem, but it was symbolic.
Sure.
And that David required 2 whole cities, all of the workers in the cities, to be driven to providing the daily banquets for the king. And
You got this big temple to run.
yeah, and then Solomon comes along, and Solomon is worse. Solomon's appetite for food and for excess, you would create banquets that could feed 10,000, and there were only 100 people at the banquet.
Yeah.
And that this was, the excess. And then my Old Testament, what?
Yeah, but even the temple,
The temple itself. Yeah.
that fits right in there,
Yes,
doesn't
it does, because, they wanted to be celebrated as the ones who could, and the temple, as it was established, this was the place you could go, and it was the house of God. It was the place where God dwelled in the temple. And boy, you talk about how far we are from that now, where we try in preaching to talk about you as the individual are the incarnation of God. God lives in you, and God goes out into the world in you. Don't be deceived. You are a vessel of God. But that theology of David was, you want to meet God, go into the temple.
Solomon too. Make it prettier.
And I can't stop hearing the voices then of my own, mentors. Tom McDaniel, Old Testament professor extraordinaire, said, read what it says about David. That the promised land, the metes and boundaries, could be laid out by a cartographer to where the promised land was. And the corners of each of the 13 provinces that were given to the sons, the tribes, it's in there. It's in. Where is the geography of it? And yes, they began to have serious trouble with invading nations. And, again, Samuel's thing was, when we get into these areas, you have to kill everybody that's native, because they'll only lead to disruption.
Right.
Okay,
Oh,
so.
and Moses told us
Yes,
that.
Moses, that's it. It was Moses who said, you gotta kill everybody because
Yeah, I don't
you'll,
think Saul
you'll just,
said that.
you'll just be breeding contempt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Saul's big failure was, he didn't do that. He wouldn't kill all the inhabitants.
He wasn't warlike enough.
Right, and then David gets into power, and the 13 provinces, the promised land, aren't big enough.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's, Tom McDaniel would put a map up on the board, and if he drew the boundary of the promised land, looked something like this, and then the kingdoms that David conquered were like the walls of this building.
Oh, and did he go after Greenland, though? I don't know.
Here we go.
I'm wondering the significance that he did that and increased the size of of Israel, but he never got to build the temple.
No, he didn't.
Solomon got to build
Yep.
the temple. And there's so much in there, which I think is such boring reading. There were 15 cubits
Oh,
of this,
exactly, the
100
measurements of
sheaves
everything
that,
and what the material was.
And, the wood's coming from Lebanon. And it's like, with so much emphasis on that, what is the significance that David didn't do that? The great warrior, the one you would expect to have been able to do that, God said, you're not going to build the temple. Was it a step too far? Or was it trying to push people back on the right track, to not put everything into the temple?
I'm trying to remember who and how and where the word of God came.
That he has denied. Take a look. There was a coordinated smear campaign orchestrated against him. All they were out to do was to
I don't know where that's coming from.
I think you can mute it, can't you?
Yeah. Is it on from that?
I'm pretty
There, I
sure.
think it stopped now.
It doesn't say who that is, so
We just had father and child by wayside.
I don't know.
it's God speaking to us.
So, where I was going was, so who delivered the word, to David? It was the prophet Nathan, I think, who said that to David. But the idea was that he had blood on his hands.
To lower the standards, to make you the Secretary of Defense, simply because you are buddies with our president-elect. Drunk in front of 3 young
Oh, it
female
sounds like
staff members after
Yeah,
you
The Senate hearing.
Yeah.
had an alcohol policy and then reversed it. True or false? And that was Spears.
I don't know, we're getting a lot of bleed over of other there, it's gone now.
Okay.
I think it's gone now. I'm not sure if it was Colette's, because it doesn't say iPhone anymore.
Okay, all right.
Was it me?
No.
No.
So David David is told by the prophet, I think it was Nathan, the same one that came to and confronted him about Bathsheba. And challenging as it is, David was told, because you have blood on your hands. Now I want to know, where did that come from?
And which blood did he mean? I should go back and look. Did he mean collectively all
warrior.
of the awful
Yeah,
stuff
he was
did?
the warrior.
Not just the
No, not just
Uriah.
not Uriah. No, it was blood on your hands because you built the nation through war. And I want to go, okay, where somebody extinguished some of that tradition that was critical of David. Because where was that when all this was going on? David was the conquering one, going out.
And they're cheering him on.
Yeah, and truthfully, I mean, I'm reminded a little bit of Putin in Russia. Why does Putin want Ukraine? It's for wealth. It's wealth. He wants the resources. And David, if I had been that prophet, I would have said, you can't build the temple because the wealth that you have amassed it's not just your hands are bloody, it's that all the wealth now of Israel is at the expense of the nations you have annihilated.
My guess is that the bloody hands thing back in those days probably had more of that meaning, don't you think?
Probably so.
I mean, so hard to know
yeah.
what these different,
You've just, you've gone out
I
and
think so.
you have destroyed our neighbors.
yeah.
So when David got the offering envelopes, there was only one subject.
Damn.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I noticed in here that under exile threatened, do not be haughty. And just a little bit later about prideful. Where was that? Shoot. Anyway, say to the king and queen mother, take a lowly seat, for your beautiful crown has come down from your head.
Yeah.
And somewhere else thought that it talked about pride. And they clearly they were far astray.
and lost in
Yeah.
their pride, which is why, as graphic as it is, the idea of exposing
Yeah.
their
They're privates.
Their privates. Talk about the opposite of the pride, the humiliation.
so.
You
think that's what's-
you need to be brought way low because you have lived so high and so haughty.
Yeah.
And again, I feel like Jeremiah has become my friend in some ways because he's helped me to think it's not just my contemporary faithless critique of the Davidic line that raises these questions about, you say God did this. You say God brought all this wealth and God built this Jerusalem. What if it really was just you?
And now we try to say the opposite. I have amassed all this wealth because I worked hard for it, giving no credit to God at all. But
Well, and that's safer because then God can't claim any of it. We don't have to put anything in that envelope.
right,
You know,
forget your envelope.
that's like the priest and the rabbi that were talking about what they do with the morning offering, and then, and the rabbi said, well, we take a portion of the offering, and he said, why? What do you do? And the Protestant pastor said, oh, well, we just take the collection plates and throw it up in the air, and what God wants, God takes. And we use the rest of it for us.
Wow.
Yeah. So, no envelopes at all. We know where that money all belongs.
Oh, man.
Well, arrogance, right? The arrogance of humanity to think that we are just because we're doing something in the name of, just fill in the blank. And we can treat people the way we want and have a scapegoat. It's either the government or God or, circumstances making me do this, and losing sight of the fact that I think we're supposed to be blessings to one another, no matter what's going on around you. Find a way to do that. That's hard. We don't do that well.
No, we don't. We don't do it at all, I don't think. I mean, I think about, I don't know why, but, the pacifists or the Amish come to my mind, that they have declared off of war and won't, they don't. But then I look at them and I go, that's not right. Like, that's not right. You can't just all of a sudden decide that you're going to live in
Not
a
a part of the
society and
world.
not participate in any of it,
Yeah.
and not be responsible for anything that goes on.
And may as well be monks. I
Yeah,
mean,
and you care. They're very generous and they're very
Yep.
nice people to live around. They can do the simple blessings of life, and they do, and they live a lot off of the land. Their society, at least the society in Lancaster, is all cash based. They don't
Right.
do any credit.
Do they do outreach? I mean, do they actually,
No. You mean try to convert people?
or no, just give to others?
No, I'm going to say no.
I don't think so.
think they do. Because their sense is the community is, again, what I talked about how the Protestant church used to be. It's for us. God has created us for us.
Insular.
And to be a place where someone can, the story in the Old Testament of the cities of refuge, where if a criminal could make it to the city of refuge,
Yeah.
they were protected. The walls around them were protecting. And there they could live, but they could never leave. And in some ways, those cloistered communities of the Amish are like that. Again, the Lancaster area, Pennsylvania Amish are very wealthy. Ohio is a different story. The land in Ohio doesn't support the wealth the way the fertile soil of Lancaster
sure.
does. Like, it's entirely different productivity level. But the Amish around where my mom and dad were, and they were enormously welcoming and friendly to my mom and dad. I mean, they got invited, they went to Amish weddings. You know, my mother needed someone to help around the house, and one family, they had a 16-year-old daughter. She came, cleaned my mom's house, and, you know, took care of them. When both my mom and dad were very sick, the Amish church, or the Amish community, once a week came to their door and sang hymns. You know, and just, and there were letters written about, you know, how wonderful it was for that community to know my mom and dad and to have a chance to care for them and participate. And so it's small, but I think it's characteristic of how they like to think about themselves. You know, we're simple people.
And they want to stay that
We
way.
can care for our neighbors,
Yeah.
but
So in a way, it's kind of doing what Jeremiah said.
it is.
Yeah, so, but how, you know, there's got to be a way to walk in the world, to be of the world and not at the same time, a balance, you know, maybe? I don't know. If you find out how to do it, let me know.
Well, I think that's why Jesus came,
Right.
Yeah.
to show us that.
Yeah.
But I can't live up to that.
And one thing that gives me some hope about people, though, in general in this country is look beyond the bureaucracies and just people coming out now to help.
True.
Yeah.
And our country's always been, as
Yeah.
long as I know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
been that way. And we're, you know, we give more to charity than any other country.
And this is
Right, we
true.
give more for the
You know?
protection and care of other nations.
Yeah, all of
We
that.
do, and
Yeah.
it's not war stuff, it's food and.
Yeah, I mean,
you
we
know,
do the war stuff
yeah.
too, but,
General welfare. Yeah, we do. I think a lot of people really still believe that that is part of the mission of the United States, to be, you know, a giving nation, a benefit to the world. So, and then there's these other forces that say, no, we need it here, we want to keep it. How do you balance? Maybe that's why politics are the way they are. You have one side kind of break through for a few years, and then it swings back the other way, and then, you know, we can't quite make up our minds.
well,
Do we want the
we
giant
know it's a
temple?
I mean,
or
it's a
do we want-
struggle.
It is. You know, do we want that giant temple and we have to support that? Or do we want to go out in the countryside and just make sure everybody's doing okay and take care of the orphans and the children? And then the next thing is, oh, the temple needs some beautification. You know, it keeps going back and forth like that. And there's some benefit to both sides. I actually can see the idea of building edifices. I think they're lovely. It's artistic. It's beneficial to the human nature. But when it takes everything away from the other side of the mission to take care of the people, there's got to be a better balance.
Yeah. Well, the edifice, you know, beautiful church buildings have given visual representation that and sometimes inspires people then to give. It does, because there's something I can see and they can touch. But
And
it doesn't always work
feeling you're
that
in a
way.
sanctuary, a holy place,
Yeah,
can be wonderful, you know.
yeah,
But there's a limit.
well, that was the battle that was a part of the founding of this congregation. You know, they had a different vision. It was a vision that said we
Cinder
don't.
block was fine, and
Well,
don't paint it.
yeah, and they didn't need a building. They
Right.
believed they didn't need a building. They
It was
thought
house
the
church.
building was going to be in the way.
Yeah, it was house
But
church at first.
what happened was, the people that came and were drawn to the church said, but we need something more. We can't keep doing this in our living rooms. We can't, we need something more. So, and in order to get a pastor to come to the church,
Yeah.
they had to build the manse. So they did that, and then people said, okay,
I remember one of the big arguments when I was on session was, should we paint the cinder block? And it was like, well, I think I remember saying, wouldn't it look nicer? But the idea was we weren't gonna spend money
Simple,
on
simple, huh?
the plant.
Yeah, they didn't want the way it looked to be a factor, but it's human. We are human.
It is.
We are affected by that.
When the church renovation happened, I voted against it because I knew we had a leaky roof.
We did.
And I said, okay, let's fix the roof or change it, but I was concerned that we would go down the road to financial ruin.
Yeah, and you were prescient.
That's right.
Frankly, because
That's
really,
right. And
it became a big boondoggle.
and, there's almost no way you can avoid that. I would sit in front of the session at the Boundbrook Church, which again, big congregation, bigger building. It was like, it's a cathedral. And we calculated at one point how much money it was costing us to heat this building.
Oh, yeah,
It was phenomenal.
yeah.
People don't
And there was no way to change it because it was a slate roof and it wasn't insulated and, it's like, okay, so we just keep pounding away, putting heat out into the universe and, just seemed hopeless.
Are they still doing that?
No. Well, they're still doing it, but they got a grant from the state historic preservation grant. And they spent a fortune replacing the
Solar
original
panels?
slate roof, but then insulating underneath it.
Oh,
So they could
Yeah.
then seal it off somewhat.
Yeah.
But it's still the massive interior space needing to be heated, and heat rises.
Yes,
it.
it does.
It
It's
doesn't
got high
come
ceilings.
down here. The wisdom of some of the cathedral builders was they put those heat pipes in the bottom of the pews.
Yeah.
And they ran the hot water through so you could put your feet,
getting warm.
get warm. But we didn't have
And
that.
the heat came up, sure.
Yeah.
We actually
yeah.
had that in our Brigantine church.
Yeah, we did not have that. So,
ICPC, the Islamic Center of Passaic County, has 3 campuses now, and 2 of them are expected big expansion. I'm like,
yep.
I'm not involved in it anyway because only the board is making decisions.
Oh, is it all men?
There's input, no, actually, it used to be, but
Right.
it's not now. But there used to be no input. Now there's a lot more input from the congregation. But everybody seems to think, yeah, because if you go during Ramadan, you can't get in the doors.
Right.
There's all these outside tents. And last year, it was really cold. This year, it's going to be in March.
March,
It's going to
yeah.
be even colder. So, we need the space. So how do you argue against that? You don't.
You
I
don't?
guess.
And why argue against
I'm
it?
not gonna.
Make room for everybody.
That's it. Especially when the neighbors don't want you there. In Clifton, they don't want us in that building over in Clifton. And the plan is to enlarge the parking lot because that's their big complaint.
Sure.
You have all these cars all over the streets and they're correct. So they're going to enlarge the parking, but they're going to enlarge the plant as well. So you're still going to have this problem. I don't know. Been there, done that. I'm glad I don't get called on to. I just get called on to. Would you go out with us and do dawah? Would you, reaching out and capturing souls and I don't know. I don't do that well. I don't want to do that.
You go to St. Paul's Pantry or
exactly.
shelter.
You do that.
Yeah.
You do
do
the
that.
mission
That little
evangelism.
That little bit I
that's
enjoy
good.
doing, and that's my niche. I'm too old now to go out and fight to find funds to make a gigantic, Actually, now I'm thinking maybe I should say, because Solomon or Suleiman was great because he made this great big.
Big, beautiful
So
temple.
the message wouldn't be the same. It just wouldn't. I'd probably get looked at like, what's the matter with you? Anyway.
All right. Thank you for a lively conversation today. I don't know that we even touched on any solutions of anything. Except that I think the most Christian thing to do would be to go become a hermit and, and,
No.
and try to live above or beyond or outside the realms of all the consequences of life. I don't know. I don't really feel that.
I really think that we have it pretty hard because we have technology,
That's right.
Oh,
I agree.
you know?
It makes
And
it so easy to do the wrong thing then.
Yep.
I think it's a little harder than it was in the past.
Yeah.
Incidentally,
Not that it was ever easy, but, you know.
one of the complaints about Islam was that, against Christianity, was the whole system of monks. They said, you cannot, it's sinful to wall yourself off from the world. You need to be a part of the world. And they would say, well, half the religion is marriage. In other words, get yourself stuck into
Build a
to
family.
life.
Right.
Yeah. But, then I can see the appeal of being a monk occasionally, because
Yeah.
I have to say, the monasteries and the monks and the nuns that I have met and, visited and so forth in Uganda are the ones doing the best work.
yeah, they
Yeah.
probably are.
They really are.
Yep. They don't have any other things to distract, like kids going to school and all that jazz. Yeah, there's something
No,
about
they
that.
really are effective.
Sister Wendy, who could beat her? I love Sister Wendy. Without her, I don't think I'd have any appreciation of art the way,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. And that wasn't a mission bringing food to it was bringing,
Beauty.
the life of the soul to the people. I mean,
Well, that's
Yeah.
a great way to serve humanity. I
I
mean,
think so.
inspiring that. It's just so much more to think about and to live for than just money and wealth and power and all these things. I don't know.
When you get up in the morning and you think about your plan for the day, how does it influence that? That's a tough one for me.
It is. I mean, I think it is. It's a tough thing.
I'm much more reactive than, and, I hope my reactions are mostly good, but,
Oh, Elaine, come on. You have a wonderful mission. I mean, that,
Yeah, but that doesn't give-
you've got your mission well intact. I think half the time I don't know what I want. Oh, I want to do this. Oh, I want to try that. Oh, I wish I could be more effective here. And I'm like kind of all over the place. When you zero in on what your mission is, you accomplish a lot more. So it's got to be for you. You know what you're going to do, pretty much.
She's skeptical of everything you're saying. I see it
thank
on her
you, but
face.
I'm not that good at it.
Well, I don't know. The proof is in the results.
Well,
All right, I'm going to
thank you.
say thank you for joining us to those who were both on the Zoom. Bye, Barbara. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Take care.
Enjoy
I'm
the
sure
warm
the weather is nice, right?
It's
The
really